From the Youth Science Council, this is Good Question, a podcast about science in the UAE. I'm your host, Sarah Shirbaji. Today's guest is Dr. Rashed Alghafri, a forensic scientist at Dubai Police and chairman of the Dubai Police Scientists Council. Dr. Alghafri holds a PhD in forensic genetics from the University of Central Lancashire in the United Kingdom. During his studies, he developed a new system for male genetic profiling that is now being used at Dubai Police. Hello, Dr. Rashed, and welcome to the show.
Hi.
All right, so can you please give us an introduction about yourself to start?
Oh, okay. So I'm Dr. Rashed Alghafri. I started my science journey back in 2004, where I actually started my bachelor at Flinders University of South Australia. I did my bachelor in forensic and analytical chemistry. So I spent 4 years doing this, and then straight away, actually, I went into Master of Forensic DNA Profiling. Again, I spent one year at Bond University in Queensland, in Australia, exactly. After that, I came back actually to Dubai Police, where I started my work as a forensic scientist for 2 years. And after that, I decided to go to proceed actually my education journey, and I went to do my PhD. Again, my PhD was in forensic genetics. I spent 3 years where I did actually my forensic genetics PhD at University of Central Lancashire in UK. And luckily, during this period, I was able actually to do an outbreak or a breakthrough actually in the forensic genetics, where actually I was able to produce one of the male DNA profiling tools that can be used actually in forensic fields. I did file a patent for it, and I did take this through the forensic science laboratories around the world.
Mashallah, wow.
So back in 2014, by the end of this year, I came back to continue my work experience here in UAE in Dubai Police.
hmm Why Australia, if you don't mind?
Honestly, back in time, Australia was a different location where people will go to study abroad. Most of my friends and colleagues back in time at year 12, we used to say we're gonna go to US, to the States, to Europe, or to UK. There were not much UAE students in Australia, so I decided actually to go to Australia as part of being different than other people.
I see, I see. Okay, so, growing up, a lot of people dream of becoming police officers. Was this something you dreamed of as a child?
Honestly, no. I found my pathway actually after I finished my year 12. I always wanted to be a pilot. I always wanted to be in some times of my school period where I wanted to be an engineer, something related to airplanes and so on. But then when I finished my year 12, I started actually to think about my career and where I'm going to work afterwards. And
Mhm.
as I said, uniqueness and curiosity was actually something that are really represent myself.
Yeah,
I've been offered to study forensic sciences at that time, and I didn't know what forensic means.
yeah.
So I started to search for it. What does it mean and how it works? And I was very interested actually in CSI kind of movies and so on.
Yeah.
So I found it very interesting field, and I was like, let's give it a try, because my strength back in year 12 at school actually was more into chemistry.
Okay, right. And is this a unique sample of Emiratis that are in forensic sciences? Are there many more of you, or is it a very small sample?
I think there are many of me, but not that much in general.
Yeah. All right. And so, what attracted you then to forensic science? What was the initiative that attracted you to this area and that made you decide that this is something that I want to start pursuing as a career instead of a curiosity on the side, right? There's a huge difference between saying, well, CSI is really interesting and I want to do this for a living.
Yes, actually, as I said, it was something different beside
Mm,
curiosity. It was
yeah.
different than what was in the market back in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always wanted to do something different, starting from my bachelor, and then
Yeah.
when I I went through the years of bachelor. I started to see how this field actually very interesting. It's not a routine work.
Mm,
I started to see how every time actually you face a new challenge, every time you face new case, there are no cases actually exactly happening and committed being committed in the same in the same pattern. So every time there is something new to discover, every time there is a puzzle for you to discover, and
mm,
so on. So this where actually I found myself very interested into such area.
mm.
And during my bachelor, actually I found my path where I started to realize that I'm more actually into genetics, more into DNA stuff, knowing that back in year 12 and in my school time I didn't like biology at all. Biology was actually one of the worst graded subject in my school, especially
Okay.
in year 12. It
Yeah.
was the lowest grade. And I thought actually it was more about just memorizing what information are there, the terminologies, and memorizing the history of the species and so on. But when I experienced it actually during my bachelor, I started to realize actually it depends more on how you understand the concept, the theories behind it, and how actually it's very interesting to see
How it's applied.
how it's being applied and how lives actually
Affected. Yeah.
being produced starting from DNA and genetic materials.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Right. And then what drove you into being a scientist at Dubai Police specifically? Is it something you've always wanted to do?
Again, I would go back to what I said, as there is no at that time there were not much actually people
Yeah.
experienced and specialized in this area.
Yeah.
Back in time 2004, when I started my bachelor and I was coming to the end by 2008, most of people were advising me to go into MBA after doing my bachelor, which is
Mm,
Master of Business Administration, and that
mm,
was very typical. Pathway being actually followed by most of the bachelor students, because they were thinking actually how to broaden their fields and how to get more skills actually into management
mm.
and leadership. However, I was thinking, since there were not actually much people specialized in UAE in this field, I was like, no, actually, I need to do something different than what people are usually doing, and let's just specialize more into this field.
All right. So forensic science, then, the discipline itself, I'm sure it's divided into subdisciplines, right? So you can work in the police department, but you can also work in research. Are there any other categories that you can work in as a forensic scientist that aren't necessarily related to being in the police force?
Yes, when I started to search for the terminology of forensics, I found that it's not something new. It just means that all different disciplines and sciences that can be applied actually to serve justice, they call it forensic.
I understand.
So
Yeah.
everything can be a forensic as long as it actually serves justice.
Yeah. So, do you also, so you I understand from your PhD experience that you work in research as well. Do
Yes.
you still work in research?
Yes, I do. And actually, although it's challenging and not typically you find people actually who are working on their routine work, especially in the industry, you rarely find people actually who are trying to do research at the same time, especially actually in police fields. However, again, it's a different concept, and I still stick to it, and I still find it something unique for me. When I came to do my PhD, I thought there were actually 12 experienced PhDs in forensic genetics in UAE. 12 is not that big number.
Mm,
However, for me to start a PhD, I was like, what difference I'm gonna do when I finish my PhD? So I started to think in a way that I have to do something to make me actually unique, to make me different, and also to make me someone recognized between all of those 12 experts in UAE. So I started to think, what did they do to see what did they investigated and which area actually they went in. Research word is very broad. People can do some fundamental research, and some other people can do applied research, and so on. My focus was, let's just bring something that we can use actually, and we can apply, not just doing a research and just put it as a thesis, in one book, and put it on the shelf. So I started to think what challenges actually are there, not only even for UAE, but also what other forensic science laboratories are facing as a challenge in forensic genetics. So there was actually this idea where I thought if it worked, then it will be something good to be applied in the forensic genetics field, and it will serve justice as well.
Mm.
So I started my PhD based on this concept. I started my PhD with this dream where actually I need something to make me different than others. And after 3 years, yes, I did actually achieve such goal that I put for myself earlier before I start my PhD. And I ended up doing actually a very interesting applied research and apply it back actually in Dubai laboratory, Dubai Police Forensic Laboratory, as well as spread it around the world in different countries. Um, by doing such thing, it's not just the end of the research or the end of Rashid personality. No, I wanted to have some sustainability actually in my research field. I didn't see anyone actually who's committed to research while actually doing their own work in the industry. It's kind of hard to maintain this between the industry and the academia.
Yeah, of course.
So I started back in 2014, before I get graduated from my PhD. I started to think, why don't we actually start to offer and teach forensic genetics in our universities in UAE? Because there was no university actually teaching such a module, at least not even a degree. So I started to do my contacts with the United Arab Emirates University in Al Ain, and I started actually to introduce myself, and they gave me an opportunity to give a seminar.
Mm.
And when I gave this seminar, then actually I've been asked to offer actually a whole module in one of in one of their courses in biotechnology.
Mm.
So I was able to introduce such subject, which is forensic DNA profiling, as
Mm.
one of the elective subjects in UAEU.
Mm.
And from there as well, I started to apply some concepts that I thought about. Yes, I won't be able to do all of this in the same time, and I won't be able to be a full-time researcher, but at least I can start supervise students based on the concepts and proposals that I put myself and I really wanted to happen. So what I started to do, I started to put some proposals for researches, and I started to give it the students who actually are interested into such field, especially those who I'm teaching in UAEU. And from that point again, I started to get other opportunities where actually people started to approach me from different universities around the world, starting from UK, Australia, and Al Bahrain. So by now, yes, I do have a great interest actually in research, but I don't do this myself, or let's say I rarely do research myself.
Mm.
Mostly what I do actually supervise students doing their research, whether they are doing it for PhD or master. So currently I do have actually 3 PhD students, and I
Mm.
do have 3 master students as well
In the UAE.
in the UAE, and also from the 3 countries, which is
Yeah, you mentioned.
UK, Bahrain, and
Yeah,
Australia.
I see. And since you've started and today till today, is there a difference in the popularity of this field, would you say, in the UAE?
Yes, because I have seen actually when the first time we started teaching actually the forensic DNA profiling at UAEU, we started with 8 students, and now the second year we are getting actually more students who are interested actually into this subject, as well as interested into the research part of it. So when I started, I got only two students, and then I after they finished them and they graduated actually from the master, now I have the second year, I'm having actually 3 more students as well.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. All right, so let's go back to talking about the science itself. So, what is forensic science, and does that encompass, for example, psychology, or is it more narrow than that? So, you can have psychologists that work in court with the law. Is that forensic science because you're saying it's science that contributes to justice, or does it is it that broad, or is it narrow? Does it only include people who are doing biology, work in biology and work in chemistry? So can we start talking about forensic science and defining it as a discipline?
Yes, actually, forensic science is very broad. It's not very narrow. And actually, yes, there is a whole discipline actually based on psychology, which is called actually criminology, where actually they do study the behaviors. They do study the way why, or the why question for those suspects, or for those whom I'm calling the preparators, who
Mm-mm.
actually commit the crimes.
Yeah, I understand.
They do try to understand actually why did they do this and what's the reason behind it, and they do such investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And beside other disciplines as well, as you have mentioned, DNA, we have chemistry, we have toxicology, which is based also on chemistry, as well as we do have the investigation of fraud documents, the investigation of electronics and digital instruments, where actually we can also do such thing in order to serve justice.
I understand. Okay. All right. So tell us more about your role as a forensic scientist in Dubai Police. How does your work in particular and science in general help keep our city safe?
Okay, so more about me. I do work as an expert actually in the forensic DNA profiling.
Yeah.
What we do actually, we do analyze all samples, biological samples actually coming to us from different police stations, as well as we collect ourselves from different crime scene, and we do actually produce the profiles that belongs to either suspects or victims or anyone was there in the crime scene, and we try to make sense of the results by searching in the database and identify those individuals actually who were there in the crime scene, as well as who were actually in contact with whatsoever called the weapon of committing the crime.
Hmm. If you can take us through the process, so from start to finish, and then where you come in exactly. If you can take us through a process of a typical, say, crime scene, and maybe give us an example from your experience, anonymize, give us an example. So, how does it start? And what happens next? And how does it get to you? And where does it end, usually, in your experience?
All right. Most of the time, for what I will call the small crimes, we do have actually a dedicated team from crime scene investigators who actually will go and collect all the biological evidences and bring it back to us. But let's say there is a murder case where actually I will be called actually by the forensic crime scene investigators to come to the crime scene and to start investigate the crime scene. So what I will do, my part starts from this call. I will be going actually to the crime scene and investigate the crime scene and to start to collect the biological samples, which actually will help us later on in proving that someone actually identifying someone who committed this crime, and identifying who was there as a victim and so on. So usually in the crime scene, such a murder crime scene, we might find, for example, a knife. We will collect this knife, and we will collect the cells actually which were left by the person who committed the crime, which will be on the handle. And we also gonna collect the blood, which is usually coming on the knife itself, and start to analyze those samples back here in the laboratory. So whenever we bring those items to the laboratory, we start to process the samples. We start to extract the DNA, which is the genetic materials, from those contact cells actually on the handle, as well as the blood on the knife. And then we're going to compare, we're going to produce a whole genetic profile in the laboratory actually for these two type of cells and blood and so on. And then we're going to identify it whether we do have actually a match in the database or not. Otherwise, we're going to wait for the investigators from the CID department to bring us some suspects, where actually we can start comparing and giving the right answer for them, that to identify a person A actually who was actually handling this knife at that time. And then what we do, we just trying to issue a whole report for all the items and the biological items being left actually from the crime scene, and put it all together in one results and one report and send it to the usually customers who actually the police stations, or later on even to the prosecution. Sometimes in the prosecution, they do need actually more information. They might call us to investigate this further and understand what do we mean actually by these results and so on, because sometimes the terms are very scientific that we are using. After that, the last part comes actually as a witness expert in the court. So in a court, there's a possibility that the judge or the lawyers will ask actually the expert who actually worked in this case to be presented in the court to give some answers to the questions in their minds.
Mm,
And by this, actually, the journey ends from for us as an experts in the crime scene.
mm. So, do you usually find the instruments like knives in the murder, or what if you don't, which I suspect, I mean, is this common? If you don't, what else do you use as samples?
Sometimes there are. I would let me explain this to you. I usually
Yeah.
says you cannot hide actually any biological samples, because all what we need to produce a DNA profile is simply few cells. So few cells can be left anywhere. Usually, human body shed actually the dead cells all the time and wherever you are. So there is always a way that we will find something relevant to biology, and we will extract the DNA from, whether it's a nail, whether it's a hair, just cells. Sometimes even while I'm speaking right now, there are some cells actually I'm leaving in the place that I'm standing in or sitting
Mm,
in, and
mm,
so on. So usually there is something to find. Beside, actually,
mm,
yes, most of the time we might not find it, but there is another department which is the CID, who actually they will do their investigations and they will try to bring us the weapon actually which the people actually use to commit this crime.
right. Okay, so I'm gonna ask a little more complicated question because it's crossing my mind. If you go to any particular room, there must have been hundreds of people that have crossed this room. How do you identify the cells that belong to a specific person that is likely to have committed the crime when the whole place is just, I suppose, contaminated with people's cells?
Yes, this is very interesting question. Mixtures usually actually uh, do give us some challenges in analyzing the data. However, to a certain limit, yes, we can read the mixtures. However, if we are lifting or if the samples that we are analyzing had more than five contributors or four contributors, I believe it will be very hard to analyze the sample and try to identify people in this case. However, we do not go usually to have all the samples randomly. We try to pick actually the right samples, which actually might give an insight about how the crime being committed, or who committed the crime, or what would be the positions that the person who will commit the crime be handling, for example, like the handle of the door and so on. And usually the last person who actually touch an object will give the most
Mm.
the most of the sample, or will be contributing the most to the sample.
I understand. And then when you bring this back to the lab, usually this sample corresponds to the DNA of the individual who you have in this database, right? What do you usually try to correspond it with? Their blood sample, or what gives you the signifier that this belongs to so and so person?
um I'm not sure actually if I got your question very well, but if you mean the identification process,
Yeah.
then yes, we can. The DNA is going to be the same in all different type
Mm-hmm.
of samples, whether it's blood, cells, hair, or
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. So
Yeah.
we can get any of these samples and produce the DNA profile and just identify it to the database. In the database, there are a couple of options actually.
Yeah.
We might connect this sample to an individual directly. we might not find a match with an individual. We might
Mhm.
find a match actually with another crime. So we make
Oh,
sure we somehow conclude that these two crimes had someone who's actually in a link between them.
yeah.
And the third option, of course, going to be the no match. So there is a sample, it will stay there in the database, but there is no match. And by time, by investigators who actually bring some suspects to us, we will find the match after some time.
And how accurate is this procedure?
It's very accurate. Forensic DNA profiling is very accurate. I mean, when we identify a person and we say this is the person actually, or this samples belongs to this person, we make sure that it's very accurate, and we make sure actually it's very unique. So this DNA, what we call DNA profile of an individual, it's
Mm.
just a unique that cannot happen in any other individual in this world.
Hmm. And that was dependent on the technology, right? So this has progressed over time.
Yes.
So the initial technology that was used to identify people with their DNA was probably more primitive at the beginning, and then we advanced more and more, right, in order to get to where we are today, right?
Yes.
Maybe if you know, do you know a little bit about the history of this, and that how long ago did we start to get sophisticated with our technology with DNA profiling and forensic sciences?
Yes, back in time, actually, biology discipline used to use the ABO blood grouping to
Yeah.
identify people.
Okay.
But again, those kind of groups or this kind of technology and system does not actually give you 100% identification. It might give you an insight, but it won't
Yeah.
identify a person,
Okay.
because we know that there are different people which have actually the same blood grouping. Back in 2000 and or sorry back 90 back in 1985, the technology of identifying different areas on DNA that are unique in each individual started. They started with few points on the DNA. Back in time, they were actually 4 points. The technology back in time needed actually more of the DNA material to be used
Mm.
to identify those of DNA,
Mhm.
as well as those targeted regions on the DNA were not actually enough or strong enough to identify all individuals. But because the database was very small and the number of analyzed samples were very small, at that time it was enough actually to individualize people. But then by analyzing more samples and adding more samples to the database, they discovered that we need actually more of markers and regions to be identified on the DNA.
Mhm.
And again, by the technology
Mm.
development, we reached actually new era of DNA, where actually we were able to identify more regions by very easy technology and by very easy methodology
Mm.
compared to previous one, as well as the technology developed back in this time. It was actually as I said, it needs actually more DNA. But nowadays, over time, we don't need much of the DNA. A DNA profile can be produced even from one cell of an individual.
Wow.
So that how the technology actually got advanced by time.
I see. Right. Okay. Let's go back to the your patented innovation. Right. You said you invented a new genetic fingerprint. What is a genetic fingerprint? I understand that the name is misleading.
Yes, I did mention male DNA profiling
Yes.
technology. So simply, what we need this technology for is to identify males individuals. And why do we need actually to identify male individuals? Because in some samples, as you have mentioned earlier, there are some mixtures, and the more mixtures there, the more complicated is the biological sample, and the more difficult actually to analyze and to get the results out of. So, focusing more on sexual assault cases,
Mm-hmm.
most of the time the victim is the woman or the female,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the time the female will from the male, which is left actually on this or contributing to this sample. The ratio actually between the male and the female is very low. So we are talking about 1 to 3,000, 1 to 2,000.
Mm.
So it's really hard for us to analyze both samples and get the results of the male. So this is why we need actually something just to focus on male DNA, although the female DNA is presented there.
Mm.
So what this male DNA profiling is doing is just gonna read the regions actually available on Y chromosome. Y chromosome is one part of the genetic composition of human males, which is
Mhm.
unique actually for males only and not available in the female. So by using this technology, we can identify only the male part and the male fingerprint in
Mhm.
this sample, which is being left,
Mhm.
because the normal technology does not allow us to do this,
Mhm.
as the number of cells coming from the female is very high. So by this, actually, we do have a profile now produced for males. What the invention that I did was actually a more focused and more advanced male DNA profiling, because what I'm talking about now is depends actually on the Y chromosome, and the Y chromosome is inherited in the male lineage of different families
Yeah.
through different generations.
Yeah.
So by as it get actually inherited intact, what happens that it comes actually exactly, or it gives exactly the same male DNA profile from the grandfather to the father to the
Mm.
son and grandson.
Mhm.
In this way, I cannot actually identify an individual and individualize one person who actually contributed to this crime or
Yeah.
contributed to
I
this
see. Yeah.
to this biological stain. So what I did is a bit different. So I found those markers actually, and I designed one DNA fingerprint which can target 13 markers on a Y chromosome that usually or rapidly mutating. So they are changing, those markers are changing from one generation to another.
Mhm.
And by this, actually, I was able to increase the discrimination capacity from 85% with the previous technology to more than 99%.
Wow. That's amazing. Um, and just for our audience to clarify, when we say fingerprinting, we don't mean an actual print of a finger. Instead, we mean, can you explain?
Yes, back in time they started to call it actually fingerprints or
Hmm.
DNA fingerprints. Now they started to change it to DNA profile because it's not a
Yeah.
fingerprint
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
And yes, it's a clear. What we means is something unique, but they
Yeah.
used to use these terms as to identify uniqueness and to show that the technology is actually individualizing people based on genetics and based on DNA, like what they
Yeah.
used to do with the fingerprints. But yes, it's totally different. It's more about DNA profile, which actually targets certain areas on genetics.
I understand. Right. Okay. So, what is a day like in the life of a forensic scientist? So, what do you usually do in the day? How would you describe your usual day?
I would call it, or I would describe it in a way where actually it's a day with a surprise, where actually you don't know
Mm.
what you are coming for, what
Yeah.
you don't know what you are receiving today
Hmm.
to investigate. So it's really interesting how every time you have different scenario, every time you have different type of cases being committed in different ways,
Hmm.
and it's never boring stuff that you are expecting every day. You just
Hmm.
come start your day with something you don't expect.
Hmm. I have to ask you this. On a personal human level, right? You work in an area that can be a little intimidating and scary sometimes. How have you managed to deal with it as just a regular human being, right? It's a really interesting work, like you say, but then sometimes do you often familiarize yourself with a case and then find that you're empathizing and that it kind of maybe lingers in your mind and, you know.
Actually, we find it myself. I find it that the more I know about the cases, the more I see how things actually getting affected in my life positively.
I see.
Um, uh, the more scenarios I see, for example, in how people actually commit a crime to do a robbery or to commit a murder or whatsoever,
Yeah.
the more scenarios you see, the more preventive I become in my life, where actually
Right.
whatever I do, I make sure that I don't leave any chance for any crime to come and try to do whatsoever crime for me.
Yeah, I understand. Is there any practical advice then you would give to the audience with respect to what you just said?
Um, uh, Honestly, from my own experience,
Yeah.
I don't think we need an advice more than what we see actually and what we hear from awareness campaign and what we hear usually on everyday
Yeah.
basis actually from Dubai police and other headquarters in the country. Because I consider our country is very safe,
Mhm.
and thanks God for this. However, it does not mean that we should be careless. I would advise everyone to be careful in what they do, and not to not to make not to consider the safety of the city as a reason why they don't care about things and steps they are going for on everyday basis.
Yeah, that's pretty reasonable. All right. So, besides forensic science, what other STEM fields are important for us to advance for the safety and the security of our nation?
Um, uh, Besides STEM, I think everything is related to safety
Mhm.
and security. And beside these fields and in the science, I would say it's really good to focus on the awareness that as an initiatives actually being done by different police authorities at different levels, starting from the ministry and going down to the different headquarters in different cities. It's very important to focus on this awareness. Uh, Today, discovering the crime is not and solving the crimes is not the only solutions, or it's not the only goal we are aiming for in here. I think we have to be proactive as well, and starting to think how we can actually teach the generations about and make them aware actually about different fields in the safety and different things actually which can affect them. For example, we do have lots of awareness in drugs campaign, and as well as in different cyber threats, even in on things that we use on daily basis, like our mobile phones, laptops, tablets, and so on. So we do have those awareness actually to focus on as well, just to make people make the city safe, as well as make people aware actually of what's happening. So it's not only about science and how we apply it to solve the crimes, but it's also about contributing to safety by doing other initiatives and safeties relevant events.
Mhm. Does that relate to your role in the Dubai Science Council?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, we do actually focus on the main strategic goals of Dubai Police,
Mm.
whether it's more into making the city safe, or making making actually the society happy and the community happiness is one of the targets actually. And how we can achieve this target is by the initiatives that we do actually for them, whether it's something that it gives them a knowledge that we have in the police, or it's something actually to give them an awareness about certain field in the police, and so on.
Mhm. Right. This is a question that I like to ask usually. What are some misconceptions related to your field? Because there are so many movies and TV shows that are about forensic sciences, and they're so interesting. But for something to be really interesting, it needs to be exaggerated, correct? So, what are some misconceptions that you usually like to, elaborate on, and that you're like, oh God, no, not this again. Here's the what really happens in real life.
Okay, so I would say one of the more misconceptions actually is about what we see in the reality TVs, and for example CSI and so on. What we see actually is totally different than what we have in here. We see how those actors actually doing the whole process, which I just described in just few seconds, or in just few minutes. And this
Yeah.
is what people are usually, or the students usually think they will be doing if they entered actually this field. But actually, because as what I said at the beginning, it's very broad field, then you will be only focused actually on one area where you will be working in this area and start to develop it further and apply actually the methods that you learned in the science and the knowledge you learned actually during your higher education in solving crimes and in doing the forensic investigation. Other things that can be done, actually it will be done by other people. For example, you won't go and catch the criminals and bring it in here as what we usually see in the CSI. No, the field here or the focus here in the science, it's more into the laboratory and it's more into one disciplines, like you do biology or you do toxicology or you do chemistry. You're not going to do all of these things what can be done in the field. So this is one of the most important thing as well to think about. We don't want people to or students to get much excited into CSI and so on, and then actually they face the reality by seeing what they will be doing is something different, totally different. We want them to make sure actually they don't get interrupted or affected by such effect. So focusing more on what they really want by experiencing what can be done. And this is why usually we encourage students nowadays to come and experience the work, how it will be actually after they finishing their degrees.
Right. I see. Um, and what would your advice be, I think, to conclude, what would your advice be to those growing up wanting to join the police or aspiring scientists that want to specialize in your area? What advice would you give them?
One of the most things that I would like to highlight is to be more specialized in one area. I don't recommend actually students to go and think about divergence in their fields, or just to change their fields from one field to another. If they decided to get into science, they have to go more deep into science, because science is a really very broad term.
Mm.
um, and what we learn usually from bachelor degrees, if we talk about bachelor, we learn lots of sciences in this field, starting from mathematics, physics, and so on. But this should not be the aim, because we won't be very specialized with this. If we are going for further study, we do have to make sure actually we're gonna specify and we're gonna study a very specific field that we're gonna develop, because the more knowledge you have about specific field, the more you can give and the more you can develop and the more you can achieve actually into it. If we kept actually our knowledge very broad and we kept actually getting small knowledge from, or little amount of knowledge from different fields, we won't be able actually to dig more and discover and make more achievements.
Hmm.
So I would like to advise everyone to be specialized in one area where actually they can deepen their knowledge and they can develop this field further.
Hmm. Because this is a niche area, do you think there are plenty of opportunities for them once they graduate to find work in this area?
I believe opportunities are always there,
Okay.
but compared to other fields, it might not be very high opportunities.
Mm.
But again, as I said, they cannot actually not they cannot they should not actually focus on degrees with the forensic world actually on it.
Okay.
They can do any science, and then they can actually get specialized
Mm.
whenever they get the opportunity actually to
Mm.
get a career into forensic sciences.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being present. It was a really enjoyable conversation, and it's good to have you on. Have had you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. Thank you very much.
That was Dr. Rashed Alghafri, forensic scientist at Dubai Police. To listen to more episodes, you can find Good Question on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for what you'd like to see from us next, you can reach us at Good Question UAE on Instagram and Twitter, or email us at info@goodquestion.ae. Good Question is a production of the Youth Science Council and the Office of Advanced Sciences in the United Arab Emirates. Produced and directed by Hind Al Ali and Hayat Al Hassan. Sound design by Gareth Chen. Saad Al Ali is our editor. Hamad Al Mansouri is our digital media coordinator, and I'm Sada Shirbaji.